Today we will be watching the plasma processor complete the donation process by processing the donor's unit, chart, and samples. Before we start the process, let's discuss how the area is organized to ensure that the units and samples are placed in the freezer within the 30-minute time frame. As shown in the previous video, this is the window where the phlebotomist drops off the unit, donor record file, and the whole blood sample if applicable. Located below us is where the donor record files are temporarily placed after the unit and samples are processed and collected. As you can see, we have an area that is designated for donor record files that require a quality review and for donor record files that are to be filed immediately. Lastly, the center has two freezers. Freezer FO5 is where the center stores day one collections, and freezer FO6 is used as a storage freezer. Please refer to the provided freezer maps to see how we organize our freezers. Now that we are oriented with the lab, let's take a look at how we process the bottles. Complete worksheet. The process starts when the phlebotomist drops off the unit, donor record file, and sample. If applicable, the plasma processor ensures that each bucket is organized from left to right according to the disconnect time. By organizing the buckets, the plasma processor is able to ensure that the plasma units and samples are processed and introduced into the freezer within the 30-minute time frame. Once the bottles are arranged, another plasma processor will process the bottle next in line. She will now verify that the donor number on the bottle label matches the donor number on the donor record file, and the unit control number on the bottle label matches the donation label on the donor card. Next, the plasma processor will navigate to the complete worksheet screen in Blood Establishment Computer System and fill in the following fields: control number, equipment ID, first arm used, phlebotomist ID, and the actual volume. A plasma processor will review the unit volume to see if there was an underdraw or overdraw. If either is detected, the plasma processor will follow steps outlined in the applicable standard operating procedure. A plasma processor will review the donation card to see if any soft good quantities need to be updated in Blood Establishment Computer Systems, or if a LUR adapter needs to be added in Blood Establishment Computer Systems. If so, the plasma processor will add or update the supplies per the applicable standard operating procedures. Once all the information has been entered into Blood Establishment Computer Systems and verified, the plasma processor will commit the information in Blood Establishment Computer System. Collection exceptions, minor adverse event, and donor reclass. The next step in the process is for the plasma processor to review for collection exceptions, minor adverse events, and donor classification. Let's look at this step now. A plasma processor will review the donor's chart to see if the donor needs to be reclassed. If the donor needs to be reclassed, the plasma processor will place form PP002A in the donor record file to alert quality. A plasma processor will review the donor card to see if the donor has any collection exceptions, such as red blood cell losses, underdraws, overdraws, repeat venipunctures. If the donor has a collection exception, the plasma processor will take the appropriate actions per the applicable standard operating procedure. A plasma processor will review the donor record file for minor adverse events. If there is a minor adverse event, the tech will take the appropriate actions per the applicable standard operating procedure. Evaluating the unit, collecting sample. Now that we have finished completing the donation process, we will move on to evaluating the unit. A plasma processor will utilize the hemoglobin comparator to evaluate if samples can be collected from the unit. Once the unit's color is deemed acceptable and confirmation that the minimum plasma volume was reached, the plasma processor is ready to process the unit, print the labels, and collect the samples from the unit. A plasma processor will now review the sampling part to ensure that it is not visibly contaminated. If it is, the plasma processor will clean the part as prescribed in the applicable standard operating procedure. Next, the plasma processor will ensure that the vent line is heat sealed and that the effluent line is free from residual plasma before inverting the bottle. The plasma processor will invert the plasma bottle 3 times to mix the plasma and then place the unit into the PBS light machine to prime the line. Note, the label should be facing the opening of the stand. The plasma processor tech will prime the transfer line using a set of strippers as prescribed in the standard operating procedure. Now we will remove 4 to 5 sample tubes from the bin depending on the donor status, applicant, qualified, or specialty. After collecting the sample tubes from the bin and placing them in the clean rack, the plasma processor will print labels using Grifols scanning verification and label the tubes per the applicable standard operating procedure. Next, the plasma processor will remove the cannula from the bin, verify the lot number, and place the cannula and the Y connector tubing in the appropriate support holder of the PBS light machine. The plasma processor will load the labeled sample tube into the Vacutainer holder. The plasma processor will slide the Vacutainer holder forward. The PBS light will verify that the unit control number matches the sample and plasma bottle. Once the verification is successful, the barcode match light will blink until the sample is filled. The tube is removed from the Vacutainer holder and inspected by the plasma processor to ensure the sample tube is approximately half full. The previous steps will be repeated for samples collected from the bottle. Next, the plasma processor will remove the Y connector tubing and cannula from the support holder. The cannula is immediately discarded and the plasma bottle is removed from the bottle stand. The plasma processor will then heat seal the bottle. After the donor unit and all samples have been processed, any remaining bleed numbers will be discarded into waste immediately. If you follow me this way, the plasma processor will show you how to process a whole blood serum sample. The plasma processor will verify that the whole blood sample has been sitting upright for 30 to 60 minutes from the time of collection by comparing the time of the sample tube to the clock. Once verified, the plasma processor will place the sample in the centrifuge and let it run for 15 to 20 minutes. Note that if there is not sufficient separation between the serum and red blood cells, the plasma processor will recentrifuge the sample.